McLaren have rightfully been lauded this season, turning around a car that was stinking up the field in Bahrain, scoring just 14 points in the first 5 races, into a machine that has won a sprint race in the hands of Oscar and put Lando P2 5 times, once more than Checo has managed in a Red Bull. And then Aston Martin. Their season could not be more opposite. Fernando was cleaning up on podiums at the start of the year 6 times in the first 8 races, yet look at them now. A double DNF in Mexico, the pace has dropped off a cliff, and even with 3 to go, they've already lost P5 in the Constructors to the Papayans. Fernando is running out of time to win his 3rd World Drivers' Championship, and this Aston Martin was surely the final roll of that dice for him. It was looking an incredible choice just 6 months ago, but now it's unravelling. Will he stick around? Or will he make like Vettel and pull the plug early? The rumour mills are swirling. Maybe even he goes to Red Bull. I don't know. That seems crazy to me. Let's talk about it. We know that Fernando Alonso does have a multi-year deal. We don't know how many years. Let's assume 2, right? So he had this season, his first season at Aston Martin. He's got next year as well. If Fernando pulls the plug early and isn't racing next year, we know that he's chosen to leave before his contract, which is pretty embarrassing for Aston Martin, given Vettel left before he really saw the fruits of his labour almost at the start of this season anyway. Fernando's career has been plagued with decisions that have been somewhat questionable, I think, to put it lightly. I mean, him leaving Ferrari when he did, you look at the performance Sebastian was able to get out of that car in 17 and 18, you know, it's like, damn, if Fernando was at the wheel, I'd have rated him to do a better job. But he's 42 years of age now. He wouldn't be in the sport if he didn't think he had the chance of winning a 3rd, because he believes, and I think it's clear to see, he's still got the talent to do it. So is sticking by Aston Martin the right decision? Well, first of all, let's look at the pros. Because, you know, Dan Fallows did come in over from Red Bull and inherited a Andy Green based design car. And that's going to take time for him to really implant his philosophy on it. Fallows came from Red Bull. It's not like he was moved from internally within Aston Martin Racing Point. And that big shoot up at the start of this year does show capacity, right? They ended last season level on points with Alfa Romeo. This year, out of the blocks, their 2nd quickest car straight away. That demonstrates they know how to develop a car. Could they make a similar jump at the start of 2024 like they did at the start of 2023 as Fallows continues to get his aerodynamic philosophy on top of that chassis? Quite possibly, because then you look at the brand new massive factory that they've got, that they've just finished in Silverstone. They're just starting to make themselves at home there, and you've got an owner who's exceptionally invested in Formula One, right? Obviously, Lawrence Stroll has got his son in one seat. He also owns, part owner of Aston Martin Lagonda, the car brand. Having F1 as a marketing arm, we've seen how impressive and powerful that has been for Mercedes over the years, using F1 as a marketing vessel for their road cars. If Aston Martin can do the same, taking a car company that almost went under, a British marquee, and turning it around, like, it's a double win potentially for Lawrence if things get good at Aston Martin. Because if things get good at Aston Martin Racing, they should get good for Aston Martin road cars. Yes, Aston Martin will be finishing almost certainly 5th this season, because there's no way they're catching McLaren, and they're like 135 points, I think, clear of Alpine at the moment. But P5 does mean a bit more ATR. Lawrence Stroll isn't short of money. He's not short of investing. He must have put, God knows how much money Lawrence Stroll's put into motorsport. But that ATR buff that they will get from being 5th versus the prize money they'd have got, I think for Lawrence, he's happy to lose money as long as it's keeping his son in a seat and it's good for the Aston Martin car brand. So the value of that 12 million, I think the ATR is more important to a team like Aston Martin, I'd say. So getting that ATR buff, not that it helped them last year because they had loads of ATR after the end of 2022, because they finished 7th. But on paper, they should be able to ban that ATR and do bits with it. You've also got to remember that Fernando has made himself a clear number 1 at that team. Lance Stroll's nowhere near to even be within that conversation. Fernando is an established number 1, just like Max is an established number 1 at Red Bull. There's no conversation, there's no concern about the teammate getting in your way. This is how you dominantly win championships, by being a clear and obvious number 1 at your team. Compared to, say, Alpine, when him and Ocon were close enough that they were tripping over each other a lot of the time. And, you know, Fernando's great, and I think Ocon's great, hence why he was close enough to Fernando to even be within that conversation. But Fernando's just absolutely dunking on Lance. He's nowhere near. If the car can get there, Fernando Alonso should, again on paper, be in a perfect position to win a third World Drivers' title. But of course, it's not all pros. There are, of course, many a con. The first being the most obvious as well, this team has not showcased a ability to develop a car in season. And McLaren's jump up has made this look even more stark. There's a lot of people getting embarrassed at the moment. Right? Aston Martin embarrassed Mercedes and Ferrari in particular at the start of this year by coming out the blocks, flying, jumping them immediately into second quickest car. But now with all these, well, you can't even call them upgrades, they're just grades. They might be up, they might be downgrades as well, right? And it seems that, I don't know, maybe they've just stood still when everyone else has moved forward. Okay, it's hard to say if they've actually downgraded the car. At the end of the day, look at McLaren, right? They bought that upgrade to Lando in Austria at a sprint weekend, right? 1 FP1. Straight away, he's quick. Aston Martin have been fiddling, tinkering around, trying different floor, wing combinations the last couple of races, double DNF. That can't be giving Fernando confidence, right? It's not good enough to just be quick at the start of the season. We saw that in 2022, right? Charles Leclerc started the season with Ferrari out the blocks. Quality, right? Red Bull was struggling, still trying to get on top of the car, a bit of reliability issues, and they were great at the start of the year. But the problem for Ferrari is that their pace just then disappeared second half of the season, whereas Red Bull kept on developing, kept on moving that car forward. That's what great teams can do. That's what Mercedes did for years. Mid-season upgrades. That was a big part of the reason why Lewis was so well in the fight for 2021 right up until the end of the season. Because there were times in 2021 where that Red Bull looked clearer of that Mercedes. You need a car that's as good race 1 as it is race 24, it's going to be next year, if you want to really fight for a world title. Are Aston Martin showing that they can do that they can develop their car mid-season? No, they're not. I don't know how to rate Mike Crack's performance other than disappointing. Lawrence Stroll doesn't strike me as the most patient owner, which in some businesses is probably a positive trait. In F1, you do need that patience, I think. But then McLaren, you know, Zach Brown made some pretty big changes and all of a sudden their performances ticked up. The difference is Stella moved internally. He was already part of that McLaren team. He already knew things were already being worked on 6 months before season start, right? Zach was already thinking about, okay, I might have to change things up here. So it's not that changes don't help. I think changes at the right time are important, but I would argue Aston Martin just doesn't feel like the most stable environment right now. But then of course Fernando must think in the back of his head, right? If they give me the car to fight for a world title, is Lawrence Stroll going to bend over backwards to try and somehow facilitate some kind of title push for Lance that would inherently would have to inhibit Fernando, right, for that to actually materialize? Because Lance is not beating Fernando on pace, but maybe a few retirements and maybe Fernando winning, but Lance being like P2, P3, if they really give them the car, a few retirements for Fernando, that insecurity must surely exist in Fernando's mind, right? He's not naive. He's like the least naive driver on the grid, I would say, Fernando Alonso. He knows that he's got a game to play, so has Lawrence. Fernando accepted that when he went to Aston Martin, and it's not going to happen when they're fighting in the midfield. But again, if they can bring a title fighting car in 2024, that has to play on your mind. Look, with all these rumours, do I think Fernando should give up on the fight for Aston Martin? No, I think that would be short-sighted. We've seen how quickly you can turn things around in these regulations with one big upgrade. Yes, Aston Martin haven't done so, but with a winter off, data gathering for these next 3 races, just turn them into test sessions. Don't even worry about where you're going to finish. P5 in the constructors, massive gap to Alpine. You don't have to worry about that, right? Turn them into test sessions and understand your bloody car, right? Because the opportunity to run your car on a track, on real tarmac, is limited. It's very, very limited in F1 these days, right? You don't get the abundance of testing you used to. It's way more in terms of scaled down models in a wind tunnel and all that, right? Do your best to give Fernando something he can fight at the front with in 2024. Otherwise, yeah, you probably are going to lose him because this is his last opportunity, really. But then again, I don't know, like, he's 42, but his performances don't seem to be falling off. He's made a couple of uncharacteristic mistakes. He had that spin, obviously, in Mexico. He had a spin in Austin as well, didn't he? A bit more Sebastian Vettel style mistakes, to be honest. But we'll see. He still seems to have that dog in him for sure. I come back to the fact that if Vettel and Fernando both give up on this project before it's come to fruition, then that's so embarrassing. Like, if 6 world drivers titles between the two of them don't see the potential, then who will? But look, it could happen. And we know from Sebastian Vettel retiring last year that the ramifications on the driver market would be far-reaching. So let's talk about that. Because obviously Yuki Tsunoda would be the first name that's going to come to people's minds. Obviously the Honda relationship will be starting from 2026 onwards. Yuki is a Honda driver, very, very strong connections to Honda, and Aston, would entertain Yuki Tsunoda. But in the seat to replace Fernando, that's the sticking point for me, because we know that Lawrence wants a big name driver, okay? Again, look back to 2020, Sergio Perez in the Racing Point, one of the most on-form drivers that season, right? It wasn't just the win in Sakir. He had many an absolute blinder in what was a very good car, let's be real, right? Sebastian Vettel, on the other hand, 2020 Ferrari was probably his worst year in F1. He was a shell of the man that we know can win, 4 world titles in a row. Yes, the car wasn't great, but Charles Leclerc was absolutely dominating him that year. Yet, the Vettel name was enough for Lawrence Stroll to replace Checo, who, look in Mexico. In terms of the most fanatical fan base of any driver, even including Max Verstappen, I think Sergio's got to take it. Think how many Aston Martin cars they could have sold in Mexico if they'd have kept Checo. But they didn't. He wasn't a big enough name. They went with Vettel. He did okay. He did better in his second season, I think. But Lawrence Stroll clearly valued the name Sebastian Vettel, and when they went and got Fernando Alonso from Alpine, Fernando's delivered unreal performances, right? Don't get me wrong, I put Fernando ahead of Sebastian. I've been very clear on that from day dot. Fernando is the king of F1 in Spain, right? Carlos Sainz, I don't think will ever get close to Fernando in terms of that fanatical Spanish support. There's just that generation that Fernando came from, fighting with Michael and winning those 2 world titles in that Renault. That's just so iconic. I don't think Sainz is going to get close to that. This is still Aston Martin's team. Honda won't be with Aston Martin until 2026. So obviously Honda are going to have some kind of voice in that conversation, but I don't see that happening really until Lance goes to the WEC project, which surely has to happen, right? Surely that has to be. From 2025 onwards, Aston Martin will be joining WEC with a modified version of their Valkyrie, and that seems like the perfect move, right? Giovinazzi went over to Ferrari. He got a commemorative livery on the Ferrari, Antonio Giovinazzi. That's amazing. I love that. That's crazy. You got Brendan Hartley, Kamui Kobayashi, you got Marcus Ericsson in IndyCar. Like, you can go away from F1 after a bit of a disappointing F1 career and still make a big name for yourself elsewhere, right? And that is very possible. But then if Lawrence Stroll wants another Alonso Vettel name, there's not many to... what? Who's as big as them two? Max and Lewis was about it in terms of big, high-profile names in F1 who are active right now. Maybe you bring Vettel out of retirement. He hasn't ruled it out completely, but I don't know. I wonder how that would go down. Ricciardo is obviously a big name as well, who's been about for a long time, but, Ricciardo must be sniffing a big opportunity at a Red Bull seat. And yes, you're alongside Max Verstappen, but Ricciardo can't gamble again and leave Red Bull and go to Aston Martin. That's just not going to happen. Sainz has been continually rumoured as a Audi target. Maybe Aston Martin Sainz if he gets a bit disenchanted there. But I think he's close enough to Charles to believe that he's got a chance, right? He was within a tenth of Charles in qualifying ahead of Max in qualifying in Mexico, and has done that many a time this year as well. I think Carlos is a very serious driver, and I think, winning a title at Ferrari, that is clearly a much quicker car than Aston Martin. I struggled to see how Carlos would jump away from that. Albon would be a smart choice for Aston Martin, but I don't think that's a smart choice for Alex. I think he's got a really good environment there at Williams, a really good car. James Vowell's a fantastic team principal, a fantastic leader. DeRilton are investing. He knows his style works with this car, which is also very important. To go to a team that's currently slower than the Williams, that's not a smart move from Alex, I don't think, if you do that. Even though the potential of Aston Martin is arguably higher, no. There really isn't an obvious choice that comes to mind for me. I have to kind of come full circle back around to Yuki Tsunoda, and maybe it would be worthwhile, putting him in, if Fernando retires, putting him in alongside Lance for 2024. Yuki Lance would be the weakest driver lineup, I think, on the grid. Down there probably with Joe and Bottas, right? But I think Yuki's got enough pace. Yes, he's not the finished article. I'm not saying he is, right? But I think he's got enough pace that if Aston gave them a good car, he could showcase the ceiling of that car much better than Lance can, close to what Fernando could. I don't think he'd deliver loads of points. I think he would make silly mistakes like he did in Mexico. But also I think Yuki Tsunoda is a very capable driver, and I think he's learnt a lot, and I think he's developed, and he's very good. Yuki can showcase all this. Aston Martin's quite quick, get the odd pole position, maybe a few podiums, and yeah, all right, I'll shag it into a wall a few times, but all in all, it's pretty good. And then when it comes to loads of drivers up for contract renewal at the end of 2024 to start 2025, that's where maybe, yeah, Yuki can do enough of a job to be like, this car's pretty good, come join me, and then move Lance over to WEC. It would make sense, it would appease Honda. Yeah, it's a year of struggling for Aston Martin, but then maybe they've got a Tsunoda plus a Leclerc. And if Fernando was to retire, I think that's probably the most likely way it plays out. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Interested to hear, do you think this is all gas? Do you think Fernando should give up on this project or not? My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.